Hello and back again. It's your professor here. And today I'm just going to do a brief overview of the 7 theories that we're going to cover basically for the remaining part of this class. When we're talking about theory, again, talking about schools of thought or ways of interpreting reality. Now, generally within academic settings, the theory becomes is just basically these ways of interpreting reality that have been agreed upon in terms of like more so the consensus or just general usage or application of a theory um, in terms of interpreting reality. Um, so again, it's just this way of interpreting reality, and so you can think of theory as, you have a phenomenon, and this thing you're observing, this object in space, this object. And when you look theory, when we're thinking about applying theory to analyzing this object, the theory is going to basically help us look at the theory from an object from its different angles. Now, ultimately, I argue that the purpose of theory within social sciences and humanities is to help us interpret this reality. And the extent that it helps us interpret reality is the determining factor whether that theory we can do away with, and maybe we need to create or invent something new, or keep it because it's still serving an important purpose. For instance, one of the theories we're going to be covering is Black Marxism. Black Marxism isn't necessarily as popular today, or Marxist thought isn't as popular today because of a number of reasons. And but yet it still serves a purpose in terms of helping us interpret reality. Uh, Other theories, not so much. Um, but again, unlike your hard sciences, where you run a series of tests to ultimately arrive at theory to say that this is that, or correlation or causation between um, uh, things in nature, uh, objects of study, within social science. So like the theory of gravity, you run your mathematical formulas, and each time where you throw something up in the air, and every time it's going to come back down. Well, so now you have a theory of gravity. But on social sciences, most social science or research fails. Every time you run the test, you're going to more than likely, based on one study I saw, it was like 80 to 90% of social science uh, uh, tests fail. They cannot be reproduced. So you run a test today, but and then tomorrow it's going to be totally different. It can be totally different. And the reason is that because we're dealing with humans, and we're limited, we're biased as a species. So I might be feeling something today that might elicit a response today that might change tomorrow. So in social sciences, because we're dealing with people, that basically, biases any real, it makes it almost impossible for us to reach the rigor or the standard set within hard sciences. But again, when we're looking at objective reality, or when we're looking at reality, um, even within the hard sciences, we're looking at or observing reality through our central processing unit, our brain. So, to the extent our brains could interpret reality as it is questionable because it's limited by this. So in hard sciences, they try to control for that, but even then they acknowledge like, okay, there may be error in how we're observing this based upon, again, our measuring unit, primary measuring unit, which is our processing unit, which is our brain. In social science, because oftentimes we're so committed emotionally to theory that it becomes almost like ideology, dogma, religion. And if you don't agree with my theory, my interpretation of reality, then you're wrong, and you're going to hell. Or my job, or it also becomes impossible for us to even question theory. because it's not serving the purpose in terms of helping us clearly really understand reality. So for many, even academics, unfortunately, we fall prey to this. And now we just support, promote, champion theories that support our version of reality. And and for me, that's the complete antithesis to what the role of the intellectual is doing. It might, yes, it might support what we already think about reality, but it also might question. We have to be open to both. When you think about the intellectual, I was just reviewing. Uh, in many ways, the intellectual is forcing us to grapple with assumptions about reality that we hold true. And you could think about intellectuals through, our religious icons or figures, whether they be myth or not. Folks like Jesus, who was at one point a carpenter, but if he would have stayed a carpenter, he might have made a lot of money, but he would have never became Jesus. I was thinking about this debate between Du Bois uh, and Booker T. Washington that some of y'all talked about in the Talented 10th article. It's not that we don't want carpenters, but we do absolutely need intellectuals. So although we can think about Du Bois as being elitist, no, I think that's a little simplified way to kind of think about what he was up to at this stage in his life. But we need intellectuals. And if all we're doing is breeding and producing a class of working class folks, skilled laborers, will that change society? Can that lead to social change? Can that address what the Negro problem? If we just produce a whole class of generation of carpenters or computer scientists or whatever, is that going to bring about, if that's the intervention, can that bring about the change needed to address the Negro problem? I argue no. And it's not going to be everyone to carry on this work or to do the work of the intellectual, or take on that burden, to carry that cross, to say it another way. It's going to be a few, and it's okay. And it doesn't take everybody. So when we're thinking about the theories, let me go back. Let me share my screen with you real quick. I'm going to post the theories here in a separate module, but I'll also list them in your, like here in module 6, you'll see the two theories we're going to cover this week are Afrocentricity and Afro-pessimism. But here are the 7 theories. Now, each of these are grappling with the question of the Negro problem in their own unique way. Some you're familiar with, particularly probably Black feminism, or Black Marxism, maybe Afrocentricity, kind of loosely. But each of these theories, again, are interpreting the Negro problem or the condition of Black people, this experience within Western modernity in their own way. Let's see, what else did I want to share about it? So for the next few weeks, we're going to cover 2 a week. So this week is going to be Afrocentricity and Afro-pessimism. Then we'll have Black optimism, Black futurism. These are probably the 2 most popular right now. They're trending now with particularly Afrofuturism with Wakanda Forever. There's a lot of Afrofuturist kind of where it's being talked about. It's become part of pop culture. Black people doing Comic-Con, Black people producing science fiction, comic books, and things like that. Black male studies and Black feminism. Black male studies is a newer theory or school of thought that is really causing some. I would consider, if there's 2 bastards of the discipline right now, it's going to be Black male studies and Afro-pessimism. Maybe Black Marxism is in there too. But definitely Black male studies and Afro pessimism, because they are challenging some long held beliefs um, that have really gone unquestioned since probably the early 1980s, assumptions about reality. Black male studies is really in confrontation with kind of postmodernity and feminist thought, and how feminist thought had recategorized Black men, recharacterize or characterize Black men, not away from the monsters as we thought of them of old, but now under these terms of toxic masculinity, patriarchy, and all these things, now we're able to justify the treatment, the mistreatment of Black men under the coded language of patriarchy or toxic masculinity or hypersexuality. So Black male studies is forcing us to grapple, to question, one, these assumptions within feminism, and then two, doing something else that y'all might that y'all will pick up as you engage in the work. Um, Black feminism, again, for me, theory, if it's not helping us interpret reality or advance new thought about reality, so there's a speculative piece to theory that's also at play. And it's definitely at play with futurism, but maybe there's a piece not only interpret reality is or as it may be, kind of this future tense. I do find if it's not helping us do that, then I think it's imperative that we either get rid of that theory or we do something else with it. How can we insert new kind of life into it to help it be more generative? Especially when it comes to Black people, if we say Black people still aren't free. Freedom is at hand as well is another question, and that should be maybe a key concept. But Afro optimism is engaged in this kind of idea of freedom, and what is it? Especially if we assume that what we're saying in terms of Western modernity, living in this kind of simulation that was designed by Black people, but for the European. What is that? What are the implications for that for Black people? Is freedom, can we actually be free within this matrix, or do we need to create something else? Um, and how do we create that other thing, as Fanon warned us, that doesn't just imitate what's already been done? So, but feminism is one that I am very specific about who I'm drawing from. You're not going to get these theorists, these intellectuals, probably in your undergraduate work. You'll probably get access to them maybe in your graduate studies. They're not your popular Black feminists. They're not going to be talking about intersectionality, toxic masculinity, patriarchy, and really uh, scapegoating Black men in terms of the problems with the Black community. That's not what they're up to, which is probably why they're not popular. All they're simply doing is is acknowledging or seeking to acknowledge the realities and conditions and experiences of Black female body within the conditions of European, Western, and postmodernity. What are Black, what is the Black female body up to? What is Black womanhood to Black women? This is going to be important because the idea of gender as a social construct, Black people didn't fall under because Black people weren't considered human. So Black people had to invent their own ways of beingness in the world, including producing gender. So when we talk about, white women not working, well, Black women have always been working. So we're, even as Winter's kind of telling us about the universality of this man one and man two, and it's like generalized, and this is how we interpret what it means to define what is defined by human. This is the same thing that's happening with the idea of gender and womanhood, and this idea of woman. Or we look at this idea of woman through a particular lens, and generally it's the lens of the European. But as a lot of Black women found out during the Women's March a few years ago, they're missing the mark. We're living in two different realities. So for this, I don't want to hear, I want you to stick to the text. Each theory you're going to have basically required reading and required video. I want you to stick to the text, the evidence that I have here. Don't bring in outside white noise or outside noise. We're not talking about intersectionality. We're not talking about black male patriarchy, black male privilege, all these kind of this language that recategorize black men as black male studies was argued as caricatures, as the boogeyman to justify the mistreatment of black men. So if a black man is toxic masculine, then it justifies his death. This is how it works psychologically. So stick to the text, the reference text. If you bring in outside sources, I understand, right? Because most of us have been indoctrinated into a lot of these things, since, especially here in California. But I want you to stick to the text because this Black feminism, I argue, is doing something different than the popular Black feminism you'll even be exposed to here in your academic experience or even in pop culture settings like social media. Black men are not the enemy of Black people. They're not the white men. This popular article that even you might find even academics citing, and it's not an academic text. Cis Black men are the white men of the Black community. We're gonna unpack this some more, but I just want to set the stage for what it is I'm looking for within these texts. As you're kind of thinking about these texts, and you have what you bring to the object of study, right? Acknowledging that, but then also how do you create space for the text to your text to speak for itself? So if you're going to become a psychologist or even a researcher into the future, you want to control your stuff or your shit as you're engaging with your client so it doesn't interfere in the therapeutic relationship. You want to allow your client to speak for itself. With Black people, that's impossible. I mean, history has shown, and this is one of the paradoxes of, the Negro problem, because Black people have not allowed to speak for themselves. So so Black people, because they're not even considered human in a European sense of the word. So that when they're talking, it's inaudible. Their pain and suffering is inaudible. So now if Black people aren't considered human to speak for themselves, then then how could they produce any intellectual work that we should take seriously? Well, I'm asking you to take it seriously. So allow the theorists, these intellectuals, to do the talking and see what you learn, see what you find, see what it challenges, see what it advances, see what it, what do you learn from it? How does this interpretation help us understand reality? Like I said, the other bastard of the party right now is Afro-pessimism. This is the one I lean to or draw from in my research because it gives us an interpretation of the Negro problem that I think is the most honest and relentless. There's no negotiation within this Man-2 construct for the Black people. And it's attempting to tell us why. And so it's forcing us to challenge some assumptions, even within Black studies, that, if you talk about Afro-pessimism to some of your other classes, even in Black studies, people might look at you with the side eye or at best, or cuss you out at worst. So you better know what you're talking about. So you better do your studies if you feel drawn to this one. And I do think because of its confrontation, its willingness to stand on business and confront reality as it is, not as we wish it and want it to be. Some of y'all will gravitate toward this. Afro-pessimism, if you understand, if you have a general idea of Marxism, Frank Wilderson, kind of the architect of Afro-pessimism, he was a Marxist. So when you think about Marxism, even kind of the dynamics of this class, Marxism general Marxism situates poor and working class people as this outgroup to the in group, the upper middle class to, the bourgeoisie class. So if you think about what we've been kind of thinking, how we've been analyzing society in terms of outgroup and group formation, human, non-human, within Marxist thought, the non-human is the poor and working class. We are the robots. We are the automation. We are designed. Everything in this structure, in this capitalist system, is designed to produce working class people, working class reproduction, reproduction of the working class, which then elicits the subsequent wealth preservation and reproduction of the wealth of the bourgeoisie class. So when we think about the zone of non-being, even for now, in his later work, may even kind of shift course to more of a capitalist critique. But the zone of non-being for Marxists would be poor and working class people. They don't exist within this kind of human context within a capitalist society. Only the bourgeoisie class. The working class kind of carrots and apples and illusions of belonging, illusions of humanness, what they'll call, what Marxists call false consciousness. So these illusions of you belong, but is this an illusion to keep you going, keep you working, keep you invested in capitalism. So illusions could be any number of things, status, social media, and the status that we get and those feelings of, oh, I am somebody. When you post content and people watch or comment, illusions can be like, oh, look at this person, their rags to riches story. Oh, look at these Black people playing sports, or look at, oh, we got a Black president. So these illusions, but the reality is, that for the majority of Black people, that those opportunities, those to be, to be bourgeoisie, to be part of, considered human, are going to be few and far between. And even those Black people who do make it, quote unquote, we know that for some reason, it still seems like freedom eludes them. And some popular, Black figures in pop culture, music have spoken to this in the last few years. Of still not being free, even though I'm making hundreds of millions of dollars. Like still something is like, I'm still not free. And part of it is because you still have to answer to somebody. So, and you see that fall is hard. Like you cross the wrong person and there goes everything that you worked hard for, all your wealth, your esteem, your accolades gone in 1 second, one accusation, which is why if you go to Black male studies, this is probably, if you're interested in this work by Dr. Tommy Curry, in the green are the required texts or readings, or video. There's videos and then required readings. But we see the implications for this for Black males, throughout society. So this is again another bastard of the discipline, one that if you discuss or even take elements of their arguments and interject it into other classroom spaces, you could be, again, canceled for. And much of what this is asking us to do is just look at the facts that we have to support arguments. So Dr. Tommy Curry is a philosopher, and he's a national debate champion. So, you can't just say something, oh, I believe this or I believe that, or make a claim without supporting it with evidence. So he's asking for evidence to support these claims that we assume to be true about gender, That's all he's simply doing. So you say, okay, even something like the wage gap, or women make less money than men. Well, do they? So you're saying all women make less money than all men. And we know this intuitively that's wrong, but yet we accept it as truth and we don't challenge it. We can't challenge it oftentimes in the classroom because even our professors are invested in this. But we know if we look at the drill the data in more, we know that black and brown men make less money than just about everyone else, regardless of gender. We know that white women are the second most powerful group of people in this world, but yet somehow they're victims of patriarchy by all men. I was in class one time, my graduate school course, and it was she was in the teacher education program, and she was like, "Oh, Terry, see, women." See, she's a white woman. She was like, "Yeah, see, I can't be sexist just like as a woman because I'm a woman, and you can't be racist because you're black." And I was like, "Wow, you're the person that's going to be teaching my kids." I know if I ever have kids, they're being homeschooled, or I'm sending them to science school, and I'll teach them everything else because it's these logics that are being taught in class that we're that informing our practices as we're going out into the field, whether that be a teacher working with kids in the inner cities or as a psychologist. And we're wondering why black and brown boys are doing so bad in schools, or black men in general, or particularly black and brown men aren't going to therapy because we're not taught anything in these. And I've been through multiple trainings, multiple disciplines. There hasn't been one that centered the experiences of black men. We're looking at gender through queer studies, gender studies, and feminist studies. Not to the extent that black men, fit into any of those, but we're not centering the experiences and realities of black men, of black males. And we're wondering why black men and black males don't go to therapy. When I'm in therapy and I have to educate my therapist about what's going on. And it becomes part of the burden, and it's unfortunate. Last week he was like, Terry, I was at a conference, I heard about this Frantz Fanon. He was talking about Frantz Fanon. I was like, yeah, I mean, Frantz Fanon wrote that article in the 1950s, but still, again, we're not being exposed to this. So I have to accept the limitations of therapy, even while accepting my burden to teach my therapist how to do therapy with me. So it's a hell of a burden. So black male studies, bastard of the party, bastard of the discipline right now. But you cannot check you. I mean, if you can not like what he has to say or the argument, but if the argument is sound, you have to also acknowledge that. You still may not believe it, but the intellectual is not about making believers. It's about making thinkers and feelers. So if you just want to make believers, then I guess within academia that's fine because people are doing it. But for me and the purposes of this class, I'm trying to stimulate the gray matter in ways it hadn't been stimulated before. Stimulate your emotions in a way it hasn't been stimulated before. And sometimes, because in doing so, we can increase our bandwidth both intellectually and emotionally to help people and to help really also ourselves. Hurt people hurt people. Healthy people hurt people lead hurt uh, marches, lead hurt movements. But healthy people, what can healthy people do? What are the possibilities? And so uh, many are called, few are chosen. If you have any questions, definitely use those forums. and or shoot me an email, and I might refer you back to the forum. But if I feel like it's something I need to cover, I will. All right. I'll talk to you soon.